Sarah Monroe opened the door herself. She looked older, not physically perhaps, but in the way people do when they've been carrying guilt that no longer hides behind makeup or jewelry. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said, stepping aside. Maya entered. Her feet remembered the rhythm of these floors. Her eyes took in the same vases, the same polished banisters. She thought of how many times she had vacuumed that rug, while others passed her like she was invisible. They sat in the formal sitting room where once Maya had stood accused without a shred of proof. Sarah clasped her hands. "Chloe's gone. She moved to Chicago. She's in therapy. She's trying to rebuild." Maya raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "She hasn't spoken to us in weeks." Sarah continued, "Not since everything unraveled. She's angry, confused, but I know I made it worse by being silent." Maya tilted her head slightly. "You didn't push me. You didn't scream at me. But you didn't stop her either." "I know," Sarah said, voice cracking. "And I think about that every day. I've read your words. I've heard your voice on the radio. And I see now you were never just our maid. You were the only honest person in this house." Maya nodded slow and firm. "I was, but no one wanted to see that. Not when it was easier to believe the story they were already comfortable with." Sarah wiped her eyes. "What can I do to make this right?" Maya hesitated, then softly. "Tell the truth. Not just to me, to your friends, your donors, your foundation. Tell them you were wrong. And why? You want me to go public?" "No," Maya said. "I want you to be useful. Start something. Give people like me jobs beyond cleaning your floors. Create internships, training, visibility. You can't undo what you did, but you can change what you do next." Sarah sat with that for a long time. "I will," she finally whispered. Maya stood. "Then we have nothing else to talk about." She walked to the front door, paused with her hand on the brass knob. "I never hated you," she said without turning. "But I hated how easily you erased me." And then she left. 2 weeks later, an announcement appeared on the Monroe Foundation website, a new initiative called the Dignity Project. It would fund education, mentorship, and leadership development for domestic workers and young professionals from underserved communities. It credited Maya Williams as the inspiration. Maya didn't celebrate, but she smiled because sometimes the most powerful justice doesn't come from revenge, but from forcing the people who wronged you to become better versions of themselves. Later that night at the Arts Center, Maya listened as Kay read a new poem aloud. She walked out silent, but the house still shakes. From the weight of the words, she never had to scream. When the applause died down, Maya leaned over and whispered to Kay. "You're going to change the world one day." Kay beamed. "Just like you." Maya laughed. "No, better." And outside, as the sun dipped low over the city, Maya stepped into the evening air, not as a survivor, not as a symbol, but simply as a woman who had refused to vanish. And now the world could no longer look away. It had been 4 months since Maya walked away from the Monroe estate. 4 months since the truth cracked through the silence and changed the trajectory of her life. In that time, she'd spoken at 8 conferences, helped write policy drafts for workplace dignity legislation, and met with over a dozen advocacy groups from across the country. But some of her most profound moments came not in boardrooms or on stage, but in ordinary spaces with people who had never been heard. She met a woman named Terry in a church basement in Savannah. Terry was 63, had worked as a school janitor for 32 years, and had been fired for improper conduct after reporting a supervisor who called her gal one too many times. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," Terry said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I kept thinking, who would take my word over his? But when I heard your story, I finally said something." Maya took her hand and held it tight. In New Orleans, she sat on a folding chair under a mural of Harriet Tubman, listening to an elderly gardener speak about being shorted overtime pay for years. "You made me believe we deserve more," the woman said. "That we're not asking for too much, just the truth." In those spaces, church halls, town centers, school auditoriums, Maya felt a different kind of electricity. It wasn't about spotlight or applause. It was about connection, about repair. And yet there were moments when her own wounds throbbed quietly beneath the surface. Sometimes she still woke up hearing Chloe's voice. Sometimes she still wondered what might have happened if there hadn't been a hidden camera. If Louise hadn't remembered, if the truth had never had a chance to breathe. One early evening, as Maya sat on the back steps of the art center, watching the sky turn soft with dusk, Malik appeared beside her, holding 2 ice creams, vanilla with caramel swirls, her favorite. "You've been quiet lately," he said, handing one to her. "I've been thinking," she replied. "About them?" "Not really." "About me?" "About how I spent so many years shrinking myself to fit into other people's comfort zones, and now I'm finally filling my own space." He nodded, then licked his cone. "You know what I like about you?" "What?" "You don't talk like a hero, but you move like one." Maya smiled. "That's because I'm not a hero, Mal. I'm just someone who stopped waiting for permission to be visible." He leaned against her shoulder. "Still sounds like a hero to me." That night, she opened her notebook again. She hadn't written much in weeks, too busy with meetings and travel and phone calls. But now, under the dim glow of her bedroom lamp, the words came easily. To be seen is not the same as being safe, but it is the first step toward freedom. I used to pray for peace. Now I pray for courage. Peace is a luxury for the protected. Courage is the gift of the scarred. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. The next morning brought something unexpected, an invitation. It came from a producer at NBC, one of the nation's leading broadcast networks. They were filming a special segment called Silent Labor, focused on domestic workers and their fight for equity. The producer had read about Maya's story, listened to her podcast interviews, and wanted her to appear on the program. "We want to highlight your experience," the email read. Unfiltered, uninterrupted. Maya hesitated. This wasn't a podcast recorded in a friend's apartment. This was national television, a studio. Cameras. Judgment. She stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Yes, but only if I can speak without censorship, and only if you promise to show not just my pain, but my power." They agreed. The taping took place in New York under bright lights in a soundproof studio. Maya wore a simple navy blue dress. She didn't wear jewelry. She didn't want distractions. The host began with a gentle introduction, then asked, "Maya, what did it feel like being accused of something you didn't do and having no one believe you?" Maya looked into the lens and then into herself. "It felt like disappearing," she said. "Like every good thing I had ever done evaporated the moment a white girl pointed a finger. I wasn't a worker anymore. I wasn't a woman with dreams, with bills, with a brother who looks up to me. I was just suspect." She paused. Let the silence breathe. "But here's the thing. When someone tries to erase you and you're still standing, you become more than a name. You become proof. That's what I am now. Not revenge, not a symbol, just proof that truth can outlive lies." The host nodded, visibly moved. "And what would you say to people still waiting for their truth to be heard?" "Hold your ground," Maya said. "Even when the floor under you shakes, and remember, being silent is not the same as being invisible. One day, someone will hear you. Even if it's just one person, that's enough." After the interview, as she stepped outside into the New York breeze, Maya exhaled deeply. The city buzzed around her, oblivious, but she felt centered, rooted. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was rewriting the narrative of who got to be heard and who no longer had to ask for permission. The lights from the television studio still echoed in Maya's thoughts long after the segment aired. It took only 24 hours for her words to ripple outward. Social media lit up with quotes from her interview. Clips replayed by advocacy groups. Emails flooded the inbox at the Georgia Social Justice Foundation. But what surprised her most was the silence from the Monroes. No legal threats, no rebuttals, just stillness. The kind of silence that meant someone was finally listening. Back in Atlanta, life moved on, but differently. Everywhere Maya went, grocery stores, libraries, community events, strangers approached her, not with celebrity awe, but with recognition. The kind of gaze that said, "You said what I couldn't." Some cried, others simply nodded. A few reached out to touch her hand and whispered, "Thank you." She was no longer invisible, but visibility came with weight. At the art center, Deja Harris dropped by one afternoon with a proposal. The two sat in the reading room, surrounded by shelves of worn books and the quiet shuffling of girls working on poetry projects nearby. "We want to name the new wing after you," Deja said, setting down a folder. The Maya Williams Story Lab, a space for young women to create, record, and share their truths. Maya blinked. "My name on a building?" "Yes, yours. You earned it." Maya looked around. Kay sat in the corner scribbling on a worksheet, mouthing her words before writing them down. Another girl was editing a short video on a school laptop. They didn't just need pencils and screens. They needed permission to speak. And Maya had given them that. "I'll accept," she said. "But only if the sign outside doesn't just say my name. It needs to say what this space is about. Something like where truth finds its voice." The grand opening ceremony was set for July, 2 months away. Plans moved quickly. Fundraisers, local sponsorships, mural designs. Artists from the neighborhood donated time, paint, and stories. Maya was involved in every step, not because she had to be, but because she wanted to make sure this wasn't about her, but about everyone she now represented. One evening, after reviewing blueprints late into the night, Maya sat alone in the building's back hallway. Her notebook rested on her lap. The hum of the vending machine buzzed quietly behind her. She wrote, "There are places that try to erase you. Then there are rooms you build yourself, painted in your words, lit by your name, not for applause, but for healing." Just then, her phone rang. It was Lisa. "Maya," Lisa said quickly. "You might want to sit down." Maya straightened. "What's going on?" "Sarah Monroe. She's on the radio right now. She's doing a live interview. WTL 92.3, Without a word, Maya put Lisa on speaker and pulled up the live stream on her laptop. "And I came here today," Sarah's voice trembled over the airwaves. "Because I was part of a silence that hurt someone I should have protected." Maya Williams told the truth. "My daughter didn't, and I didn't stop it. Not soon enough." The host's voice cut in. "Mrs. Monroe, why speak out now?" "Because I watched Maya speak without bitterness, without hate. And I realized I'd raised a child who believed her status gave her permission to harm, and I stood by, paralyzed by comfort. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I do owe the truth." The host paused, then asked gently, "If Maya's listening, what would you say to her?" Sarah's voice broke. "I would say, thank you for not letting my silence define you, for showing my family what real dignity looks like." Maya stared at the screen. It didn't erase what had been done, but it mattered. The next morning, reporters called. Maya declined all interviews. She wrote one short response posted to the Arts Center site. "Accountability is not punishment. It is the beginning of healing. May others follow her example." In the following weeks, Maya received new invitations. Universities requesting keynote speeches. A publishing house asking for a memoir, a nonprofit in Los Angeles offering a board seat. She considered them all carefully, but her heart still lived in the rooms filled with girls like Kay. In community centers, in stories scratched into spiral notebooks. One afternoon, as she reviewed a grant application in her office, Kay knocked. "Miss Maya, can I show you something?" Maya motioned her in. Kay held out a folded piece of paper. "It's a speech for when the new wing opens." Maya unfolded it and read silently. It wasn't perfect run-on sentences, misused commas, but it was powerful. "Miss Maya taught me that being small doesn't mean being quiet. She taught me that truth is a muscle and I'm learning to flex mine. This room is where I found my voice and someday I'll help someone else find theirs." Maya looked up, eyes misted. You wrote this? Kay nodded. It's not too long, is it? It's perfect, Maya whispered. That night, Maya sat under the mural outside the soon-to-be completed story lab. The wall was covered in painted quotes from women of color, some famous, some known only within the community. One corner had been left blank, waiting for Maya's words. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled the one line that felt right. They tried to silence me in one room, so I built another and filled it with voices. The next morning, a local artist painted those words in bold white against a background of deep purple and gold. When Maya stood back and looked at it, something inside her settled. She hadn't just survived. She had shaped the silence into something that echoed, and it would echo long after she was gone. The mural was complete, the paint still fresh, and the community buzzed in anticipation of the Story Lab's grand opening. Flyers went up in local barber shops and coffee shops. The local news teased a special segment. A local gospel choir rehearsed in the evenings under the flickering fluorescent lights of the center's multi-purpose room. Maya, usually calm and collected, found herself restless. It wasn't nerves about the spotlight. It was something else. A letter had arrived that morning. No return address, no stamp, just slid beneath the door in an unmarked envelope. Maya, you should have stayed in your place. People like you don't build legacies. They clean up after them. You're not a hero. You're a disruption. And disruptions don't last. There was no name at the bottom. Maya read it once, then again, her fingers gripping the paper until the corners crumpled. For a moment, the air in the room grew thick. Familiar fear crept up her spine, not from the words themselves, but from the reminder that not everyone had changed. She'd spent months turning pain into purpose, building rooms, speaking truth. But here it was again, the old voice, the one that told her she wasn't enough, that she was temporary. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and closed it without a word. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she got back to work. The day of the Story Lab's opening arrived hot and cloudless. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and barbecue drifting from nearby vendor tents. Folding chairs stretched across the lot. Children ran between legs and speakers. Local politicians mingled uncomfortably near the back, unsure how to dress for the occasion. But everyone was there. Everyone except Chloe Monroe. Maya hadn't expected her. Not really. Still, part of her had wondered. Instead, Sarah Monroe stood near the front, quiet and alone. She didn't ask to speak. She clapped when others did. She stayed behind after the ceremony to shake hands with Deja, then left without making a scene. Maya saw her, nodded once, and kept moving. She had a job to do. Kay delivered her speech with confidence. Her voice trembled only once, and the audience erupted in applause at the final line. This room is for us, the ones who were told to whisper, but chose to speak. Maya followed. She stood at the small podium, sunlight casting shadows across her face. I was never supposed to be here, she began. Not because I wasn't capable, but because there are systems in place that decide who gets remembered and who gets erased. She paused, letting the words settle. But erasers don't work when we write our own names. When we tell our stories, even when our voices shake. This room is not mine. It's ours. It belongs to every child told they were too much, too loud, too poor, too black. This is the house we built from the bricks they threw. The crowd stood. After the speeches, people toured the space, the recording booths, the writing corners, the wall of first drafts donated by local writers, poems with crossed outlines, stories with ink smudges. Truth told imperfectly, but told nonetheless. While Maya gave interviews and shook hands, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Luis. Turn on Channel 5 now. She slipped away from the crowd, found a quiet office, and turned on the small wall-mounted television. The screen showed a studio news anchor and shockingly Chloe Monroe. Maya's jaw tightened. The interviewer leaned forward. Miss Monroe, this is your first public appearance since your family's involvement in the Maya Williams case. Why come forward now? Chloe looked thinner. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her expression unreadable. "Because I've been silent," she said slowly. "And silence is how people like me get away with things." The anchor blinked, surprised. "You're admitting wrongdoing." Chloe nodded. "I accused someone of stealing. Not because they stole, but because I was angry. Because Maya existed in my space, and I didn't want to admit I needed her. I used my privilege like a weapon. And I'm ashamed." Maya stared at the screen. Her heart beat faster. She wasn't sure what to feel. Relief, vindication, confusion. "Do you think she'll forgive you?" the anchor asked. "I don't expect forgiveness," Chloe replied. "I'm just trying to stop being the kind of person who would need it in the first place." The segment ended. Maya turned off the television, sitting in silence. It was too late to undo what had been done, too late for apologies to erase fear. But something shifted inside her. Chloe had spoken. And maybe, just maybe, that meant other doors would open. Later that night, Maya returned to the arts center. The chairs had been folded, the tables wiped down, but in the quiet, she walked through the new wing, her fingers brushing the wall. In the far corner, a small shelf had been added without her knowing. On it sat a framed photo of Maya, not from the podcast, not from the television segment, but from years ago, sweeping the Monroe family's hallway. Beside it, a plaque read, "Truth doesn't start with fame. It starts with work done in silence with dignity that no accusation can erase." She stood there for a long time, then pulled out her notebook and wrote one more entry. "They tried to make me a footnote, but I became a headline. And when the story ends, it won't be theirs. It'll be mine." Morning arrived in Atlanta like a promise. Light dripped through honeyed curtains. Birds chirped in the dogwood tree outside Maya's apartment. The world felt quieter, but stronger. She woke slowly, aware of a fullness in her chest. Not triumph, not burden, hope. She checked her phone before getting out of bed. Messages pinged from across the country, people she didn't know, telling her how her story had changed theirs. One from a woman in Charlotte. "I filed my complaint today. I found courage because of you." Another from Detroit. "Thank you for holding truth without hatred. I used to think those were exclusive." Maya pressed the screen to close the messages. She whispered, "They're still listening." Then she stood and began her day. By mid-afternoon, she walked the quiet halls of the Story Lab. Kay worked on a podcast episode. Another teen practiced storytelling into a mic in the small production booth. Everywhere you turned, voices were rising. That's when her phone buzzed again, an invitation to testify before the Georgia State Legislature. One of many hearings in progress about passing a bill to protect domestic workers' rights, prevent false accusations, require fair process, and mandate recorded evidence before termination. Maya exhaled. 19 years earlier, she had scrubbed toilets in a different state, imagining a future she couldn't name. Now she was being asked to shape law. She accepted. 2 weeks later, Maya stood at a lectern in the state capitol. High ceilings arched above her. Red carpet ran down wide marble steps. Dozens of lawmakers and reporters watched. Family advocacy groups sat in the gallery. Banners reading "Dignity doesn't discriminate and truth matters." Below the lectern, a junior aide slipped her a glass of water. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, breathed in. She saw the younger version of herself in kitchens on her knees polishing floors, praying someone would see her worth. Not later, not after she disappeared. Now, she began, "Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Maya Williams." She paused. The title felt strange in her mouth, earned because of what had come after the truth. She let it sit. "I come here not as charity, not as grievance, but as notice that workers deserve more than suspicion. We deserve truth before accusation. We deserve voice before verdict. We deserve protection before punishment." At the back of the room, she noticed Sarah Monroe seated with folded hands. Maya continued, voice unwavering. "I was accused by someone's daughter who used privilege as a weapon, and her privilege was amplified by silence. I was prevented from leaving, searched without consent, branded publicly before any evidence existed. I was in my place serving others, but not worthy of belief. She took a breath, names she'd called out, people who'd listened, Kay's poem, the story lab, the letter, the mural, the radio segment, Chloe's public admission, Sarah's apology. Each piece folded into her presentation, not as trophies, but as context. I stand here today because truth needed more than one platform. It needed statute. It needed protection. It needed recognition that the presumption of innocence doesn't stop at the doorsteps of mansions. It should echo in the halls of justice for all people. Later, as she left the chamber, advocates waited to thank her. Families of workers who had feared speaking out. Leaders from domestic worker rights groups. Someone embraced her and whispered, "You've changed our language. We talk differently now." Exhausted but not spent, Maya returned to the story lab that evening. Kay ran up to her breathless. "You were on the news?" she said. "Yes." Maya smiled. "It means something." Kay pulled from her bag a new poem. "My sister stood so they could speak. My sister was accused so they could be believed. In her silence, she built a room. In her truth, she built a law." Maya pulled her into a hug, then looked across the room. The lab was quiet now. Desks cleared, lights dimmed, but future echoed in every corner. Headsets waited, drafts were scattered, voices on hold. She walked to the mural and pressed her palm against the wall. Her words painted in white over gold and purple, still read. "They tried to silence me in one room, so I built another and filled it with voices." She closed her eyes. In the distance, cicadas sang in the dogwood tree. The sky outside was deep indigo, stars peeking. She felt them, voices beyond these walls, voices she hadn't met yet, voices waiting to rise. And she whispered into the memory of the house she'd once served. "You made us small, but we grew anyway." She opened her eyes. She was still standing. And the river she had started was racing toward the sea. Because truths that refuse to stay buried become histories others cannot ignore. And Maya Williams, she was just getting started. Autumn crept into Atlanta with a hush, crisp air. Golden light softening the edges of each day. The trees lining the sidewalk near the story lab shifted to amber, their leaves fluttering to the ground like tiny farewells. Maya sat on a bench just outside the building, her coat wrapped tightly around her, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. It had been 6 months since the bill passed. The Fair Treatment and Protection Act for domestic workers was now law in Georgia, and discussions had sparked across neighboring states. Maya had given testimony in Florida, South Carolina, and Alabama. She didn't call herself an activist. She didn't want a podium, but the world kept pulling her forward, and she refused to step back. That morning, an invitation arrived in her inbox, simple in tone, extraordinary in meaning. "Dear Dr. Williams, we would be honored if you would join the National Commission on Labor Justice as a senior advisor for domestic worker protection. Your insights and lived experience are crucial to the future of our policies." Maya didn't respond right away, not because she was unsure, but because she understood what it meant. She had once cleaned rooms no one thanked her for. Now they were offering her a seat at the table where laws were written. That was no small journey. She finished her tea, walked inside, and entered the recording booth where Kay and a few other teens were working on their new group podcast. Voices Before Verdict. They stood when she entered wide-eyed. "You want me to leave?" she asked, smiling. "No, Miss Maya," said one. "We want you to be our first guest." She laughed softly. "Then ask your questions." The mic clicked on. Kay adjusted her notes. "Okay, first question," she said. "If you could say one thing to the version of yourself who was working at the Monroe House, what would it be?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Hold the line," she said. "No one sees your worth yet, but you're not invisible. And one day, the same voice they tried to silence will teach others how to speak." The girls nodded, scribbling notes. Another asked, "Do you think justice really exists?" Maya leaned forward. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just being able to walk down the street without fear or having your name cleared or knowing a child won't face what you did. It's imperfect, but yes, it exists, and when it doesn't, we build it. Later that day, Maya returned to her apartment and finally replied to the commission's invitation with a single line. I accept with gratitude and with the voices of many behind me. The national press called a documentary producer showed up. Universities added her name to their syllabi. She was invited to speak at a White House summit on racial and economic justice. When she walked into rooms now, people stood. And yet, she still cleaned. Not because she had to, but because it centered her. She volunteered once a week at a women's shelter, helping scrub kitchen counters and organize closets, not out of penance, but reverence for the girl she once was. It reminded her that her story was not just ascent. It was return. One evening, she found a package on her doorstep. No note, just a box. Inside, a simple silver bracelet engraved on the inside. Truth, dignity, voice. She didn't know who sent it. Perhaps someone she'd touched. Perhaps Sarah Monroe. Perhaps a stranger. It didn't matter. She wore it the next day to Washington, D.C. when she met with the Labor Commission. At the long polished table in a high-ceiling room, she sat among legal scholars, economists, and career politicians. When it came time to speak, she did not clear her throat. She did not apologize for taking space. She leaned forward, the bracelet cool against her wrist, and began, I represent those who were never meant to sit at this table, but we built it one story at a time. After the meeting, a young aide followed her out into the corridor. My mother was a housekeeper, the aide said. She never got to see someone like you in this role. Thank you. Maya nodded. Tell her she raised a witness. The aide smiled, eyes shining. Maya walked through the Capitol hallway, past portraits of men who never imagined a black woman from Georgia, once accused, once invisible, would stand here without apology. And she thought, this is not the end. It's an opening. Back in Atlanta that weekend, the Story Lab held a late-night storytelling event. Candles lit the hallway. Folded blankets covered the chairs. One by one, girls and women, young and old, stood to read, sing, testify. Maya didn't plan to speak. But as the final slot opened, the crowd called for her. She stepped up. I was once locked in a room and accused of stealing, she began. But the truth was never what they feared. It was that I might speak, and I did, and now so do you. The applause was soft, reverent. She paused. Tonight is not about me, she added. It's about what we build when we refuse to be erased. Outside, the city breathed in rhythm. Leaves rustled, voices carried, and Maya Williams stood beneath the mural bearing her words. Her name. No longer the maid, not just the survivor, not only the symbol, but the author of her life, of her legacy, of her country's conscience. And the story was still being written.